Good morning and welcome into the show. Thanks for tuning in on this Tuesday, January the 28th. Welcome to the show. Good morning. Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dream Edge A Sports Studios. It is 8 a.m. on the East Coast, 5 a.m. out west. Thanks to all who regularly watch, listen, follow the show. We really do appreciate it. Today's show is going to be a little bit of a different show in that we are going to go headfirst, a deep dive into the U.S. Soccer Federation's professional league standards. We're going to look at it from all sides, look at the amendment and technically new policy proposal because it is not included in the U.S. Soccer Federation's policy manual. So we're going to get into some of that by Illinois Adult Soccer. So we're going to kind of just do a deep dive for the entire show. We're going to go through bits and pieces, kind of peel back the layers of the onion, really give you some insight and some depth to this specific policy proposal to the U.S. Soccer Federation to be up for consideration at the AGM in a few weeks in Nashville. Last week we talked about on the show the response from U.S. Soccer, the duck and cover, the attempt to not have to engage on the matter. So they tried to put out a statement that would basically try to stall. It was a delay tactic. Like, we don't want to do it right now. It's a classic Sunil Gulati tactic. If you were to go and look at some of the comments from Sunil Gulati when he was president of U.S. Soccer, he would say, we'll look at this in 10 years. We'll look at this in 10 years. That is basically, it's a stall tactic, but it's a way for him to say, no, we're not going to do it, without him saying, no, we're not going to do it. And that is basically what that's the posture the Federation took on this issue. They tried to hide behind some vague, it's kind of like if you watch any political commentary, and I don't know how you can completely avoid it between social media and cable news. We are in the beginnings of the 2020 presidential election. It's obviously heating up even more at the moment. But you'll hear things and it'll be, anonymous sources. And it's like, seriously? And so we kind of talked about this last week about how U.S. Soccer is kind of using this. Well, we talked to a lawyer. We got some advice from an outside counsel. They thought it'd be a good idea for us not to do this. We have pending lawsuits, etc. Very vague. Just try to sound, like it's a very smart and measured response. It's just a stall tactic. They're trying to keep this from happening. And so before we get into the specifics of this policy proposal and the professional league standards in place right now, I'm going to kind of come back at the very end and give a summary of all of this and why this matters so much, but that'll come at the end of the show. But for you to kind of know where we're at right now, the mechanics of this process right now is that the board of directors, which there's only, two main spots that are elected by the National Council. There are a few others positions that are representatives of specific councils, like the Adult Council or the Youth Council, etc. There's only two positions elected by the General Council, and that is President and Vice President. And then the President and Vice President really is able to kind of shape the rest of the board. And so in that process, the way it currently stands, and there's nothing in our bylaws or policies in the policy manual that govern this. This is something the board has done on their own. They have gone completely rogue. There is no provision, explicit provision that allows them to do this process. The process that they describe even themselves in their statement in the book of reports as to why they don't think any inclusion or amendment concerning the professional league standard should be passed. But they have taken it upon themselves, granted power to themselves, not in the bylaws or policy manual, to create a task force to write rules to govern the professional leagues. And that task force is appointed by the president of the board. He can pick whoever he chooses, put on the board, to put on the task force. They, in their current setup, they write the rules. Then they submit their version of the rules to the professional council. The pro council then can send back notes. The task force then kind of takes those up to consideration. Doesn't mean they have to implement them. They just have to take them up for consideration. And then they ratify the pro league standards, submit them back to the board. And then that is what the board uses to operate. Now you can see why that's such a big problem. So you can have hand-picked, non-elected, unelected members of a task force who have no accountability to the sport, who have no accountability to the general counsel of U.S. soccer. You have no accountability even to the pro leagues themselves. So you could pick favorites. You could say, we prefer the NWSL over everybody. The way it currently is written, it favors Major League Soccer over everybody. And those rules can then be submitted back. So when the last sets of changes took place, they were all under Sunil Gulati. And at the time, Sunil had appointed these members of the task force. Sunil Gulati was on the payroll of Major League Soccer, specifically Bob Kraft up in New England. So he was wearing two hats. He was being paid by Bob Kraft and as part of Major League Soccer, and then he was serving as president of U.S. Soccer, appointing the task force. You can see the conflicts of interest here. Major problems, major issues. So when the board tries to decide and come back and say, this isn't a good thing, and all this is all smoke and mirrors. Okay, so let's just to kind of give you a quick summary of what we talked about last week on this issue. Today, we're going to get into the specifics of the Pro League standards. What are they? What are they as they are currently written? Why are there some problems? And why is the process in general a problem? And we've just described a little bit of that, and we will get into more of that as we go through this show. So the first aspect of this that I want you to understand is that if you were to look at professional league standards, let's go to England for a second. Let's look at the English FA. Let's look at the Premier League. Let's look at the English Football League. If you were to go and examine the rules as written by the English FA, the Premier League, and the English Football League, you would find the first stark difference between U.S. Soccer's professional league standards and their standards. And that is their standards in England are way more in depth. I mean, it's not even close. Our professional league standards look like a third grader wrote them compared to the thoroughness and complete detail as laid out by the English FA, the Premier League, and the English Football League. Each of those entities have very thorough documents. They are long and they are detailed. They are specific. They go through all types of processes. They go through personnel. They go through, the blades of grass on the field. I mean, it's not exactly that, but I mean, it goes in depth about your, not just stadium capacity, but specific, attributes of your stadium, specific details concerning the either the look or in terms of, the grass itself being heated, that your pitch has to be heated underneath the grass. There's all these different specific things they lay out about, media and media access and press and, the announcers. I mean, like, it goes through so much about how a match day is performed and the duties and responsibilities of clubs. It's very, very thorough. U.S. Soccer's document, like I said, looks like a third grader wrote it. There are inconsistencies throughout the professional league standards. There's very little guidance in terms of specific provisions and details regarding standards and levels. So what has been put in place by the Federation is a very very scaled down set of rules, and as you'll find, they focus on things that really don't matter to the operations of clubs, and they really don't ensure excellence at these clubs, regardless of Division 1, Division 2, or Division 3. So that's the first thing. I mean, before you even get into all the details of the U.S. Soccer Professional League standards, the first thing that we have to understand is about the professional league standards is they're very poorly written. They lack the depth and the detail and the guidance necessary to create world-class professional football in America. So that's the first thing we find. So they were written by a task force, as I mentioned, set up by a president on the payroll of Major League Soccer, and then you can see the influence, how the rules are skewed towards Major League Soccer in the current rules. They focus on things that don't ensure excellence. Instead, they ensure Major League Soccer is protected from competition. That's how the current rules are structured. Hence why they're in lawsuits. So when they come out and say, we don't want to change these because we're concerned about a lawsuit, what they're really saying is, we don't want these changed, and we're going to try to use excuses not to change them, because if they become fair and equitable to professional leagues, then that removes from Major League Soccer the special treatment we've already given them. And if there were to be a lawsuit in that regard, that would come from Major League Soccer looking to keep their special favors as well as their special interests. So when we dig into the U.S. Professional League standards, as I mentioned, the depth and detail that we find in documents in the English FA, in La Liga in Spain, in the Premier League in England, the English Football League in England, very little detail here in U.S. Soccer's setup. The first thing they get into are some kind of general guidelines. So first and foremost, they dig into the composition play. So the first thing is, league must determine a champion each year based on seasonal play or by means of a postseason playoff tournament. I mean, Okay. Second, league playing rules must comply with all relevant FIFA guidelines and laws of the game. So, does the word relevant mean that you get to pick and choose? Or does that mean they should comply with all FIFA guidelines and laws of the game? If that is indeed the case, should every league be operating and implementing solidarity payments and training compensation? Should they be connected via sporting merit? Article 9, promotion and relegation. League playing rules must comply with all relevant FIFA guidelines and laws of the game. People have gotten frustrated because it's all vague. It's ambiguous. Does it just simply mean that they comply with all FIFA guidelines and laws of the game in terms of on-the-field play? Meaning you got 90-minute, 2 45-minute halves, you've got stoppage time, your general field dimensions, etc., so that it technically is the game of soccer that you see on TV coming from Germany, Italy, Spain, France, England, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico. Is it supposed to? Is that the laws of the game we're following here? Are those it? That's it. That's all the detail they provide. Very little to really go by. Second, markets, stadia, and fields. At least 75% of the league's teams must be based in the United States. Last I checked, this is the United States Soccer Federation professional league standards. We have a country that is a continent super league, because that would mean that 75% of that super league are MLS teams, and that Liga MX, Liga MX in Mexico could only have 25%, or Canada clubs to take care of why we're even professional leagues. Look at outside the United States is ridiculous. Second, under market, stadium, fields, league stadiums must meet the following parameters. All stadiums, arenas must have controllable ingress, egress. All outdoor leagues, playing surfaces for all teams must be at least 70 yards by 110 yards and be FIFA approved. There's been a lot of speculation that NYCFC playing in Yankee Stadium has been violating that parameter, that the field is not at least 70 by 110. And yet they continue to play. And U.S. Soccer has done nothing about it. That is it on market, stadium, fields. You got to be able to control the entrance and exit, and your playing surface has to be at least 70 by 110 yards and be FIFA approved. As I mentioned before, the details covered in the documents that you can get from the Premier League, as well as the English Football League and the Football Association in England, are much more thorough, give much more guidance, and ensure standards, a standardized level and approach for each level. And most of these standards are created by the leagues with how the federation is being run. C, coaches and referees. The coaches of each league's teams must hold a USSF A coaching license or equivalent from the appropriate federation, if I can get my mouth to work right this morning, within 2 years of their appointment. Secondly, all games played by league teams in the United States must be refereed by Federation licensed or approved referees assigned pursuant to league-specific policies set forth by the Federation, if any. Under financial viability, Part D here of the general requirements, as specified for each division, the league must require each team to post with the league, or if so directed with the federation, an adequate performance bond or other security to secure the performance of the team's obligations, including without limitation, player and staff salaries and wages, stadium lease commitments, and third-party vendor obligations, in addition to commitments by each team to the league for the current season. In the case of a single entity league, the league must provide or demonstrate that it has adequate security to ensure the performance of the league's obligations for the current season. So we're going to pick up here in the financial viability section after the break, but this particular first piece is important, and I'm going to get to that as we get into the rest of the financial viability general requirements here coming up after the break, and explain why this is important in regards to the way some of the rules are currently written, and why they have individual player cards, tactical cards, apparel. I talk about this every day on the show, but seriously, if you haven't checked them out, go to ductigbrand.com, DUKTIG brand.com. Use promo code DWShow, and you'll get 10% off of your next order at ductigbrand.com. We'll be right back after this. Special edition of the show where we are going through and getting deep into the weeds of the U.S. Soccer Federation's professional league standards. They are a set of rules that have been poorly constructed and done so in a manner that is not helpful to growing the game. Certainly not fair and equitable to all parties. In and of itself has been done in a way where a Major League Soccer employee has been guiding and directing the last several revisions to the professional league standards, and has been able to oversee and appoint the task force that has amended and altered these rules, with the last revision coming in 2014. And it's part of the reason why the Federation is under a lawsuit right now, because of that process, the way it was handled, and all of that goes back to the fact that the board went rogue and has continued to try to stand by and hide behind going rogue. And Illinois Adult Soccer has proposed a bylaw amendment as well as a policy amendment that would essentially bring this process into a different set of procedures, and ultimately in the end would be a good thing, and we'll explain more of that later in the show. Picking up where we left off, we were talking about financial viability in company, that in either case, either from a single entity league or from each individual team in a league, so you have independent teams, that would be more akin to something like a NISA, or even in the USL, you have individual teams that buy a franchise. USL is not a single entity structure. Major League Soccer is a single entity structure, as is the NWSL. So in the case of Major League Soccer and the NWSL, they both would operate under the single entity part of that policy, that they've got to prove as a league they can pay the bills. And then the USL Championship, League One, and NISA are all having to prove individually that they can pay their bills. This is the requirement of the performance bond. Now, the reason why this is a good talking point here for just a moment is, if the federation is requiring that a team can pay its bills, and a team is able to do so. So let's just let's go into real world application for just a moment. Let's say a team in NISA has an element, then their ownership structure should not matter as much. Whether someone owns 1% or 100%, and that a deep pocket investor, maybe a billionaire or a millionaire, could not own the majority of the club. They could own a big chunk of the club by themselves, but they couldn't own the majority. There's all different types of ownership structures that could be in place. You could have the plurality ownership model. So you may have 10, 15, 20, 30 people that own a club, no one owning a bigger chunk than, say, 10, 15%. So you may have somebody that owns 1%, somebody that owns 5%. This is kind of the way other clubs are structured around the world. You have LeBron James that owns a very small percentage of Liverpool, less than 10%. I believe it's somewhere in the 2, 3, 4, 5% range, if I remember correctly. Of Liverpool Football Club. He's worth a lot of money. He owns a little bit of the club. But you could have a situation where you could essentially, let's say, go to, a LeBron James and 10 other guys, and each of them put in the money, and collectively those 10 guys own a professional soccer team in America. That could happen. And the main piece here of financial stability, viability, that the federation has put in as their first thing is a bond. If the team can prove it can pay its bills with that bond, then they should be okay. They should be able to play. So that's a point that they're making. We're going to get into why that matters here in just a moment. Any new team, this is provision 2, any new team principal owner, this is how it's currently written, must meet with federation staff regarding the responsibilities of owning a team prior to the team's participation in the league. In the case of a new league, each team Illinois policy is written is it says any new team's chief officer, right? Because you may have a plurality of owners. You could have supporters-owned, community-owned club. You may not have a principal owner. It's America. There's all different ways, as Chattanooga has proven with some of their crowdsourcing, fundraising, ownership campaign efforts. There's people all over the world that own shares of the Chattanooga Football Club. They raised capital that way. And other clubs could do similar things where they are, for who they are and how they want to be constructed. And so having our rules written to address that idea and is to modernize and standardize this process. It's one of the reasons why getting this process away from a special interest group appointed by the board is important, because you look at things through different eyes. You're not writing this with Major League Soccer as your primary organization that you're worried about. You're worried about the game and the structure of the game and the realities of operating in the United States. So instead of going through, principal owner in these situations, it's about operations, and it's about the chief officer. That could be the principal owner. It could be the president of the club, etc. Minor nuances, but they're very relevant to how you operate and how you run your team. The third point of the financial viability section, Part D, is Part 3 here, under have very little detail. They're not very thorough. You could go around the world and literally just change some of the specifics of, Spain versus the United States in terms of wording, change it from Spanish to English, and implement it, and it would be a more thorough and complete document that would make more sense for American soccer than what we have. And because it's written for Spain or written for England, it may not make complete sense, but it would be so much better even with that than what we have here. Very little detail, very little explanation. Section E gets into the league office, media. Part G, team organization. H, relationship with the federation. I is waiver procedures. This gives the federation carte blanche, arbitrary power to do whatever they want. They have rules. They're not very thorough in their details and explanation, which gives them a bunch of wiggle room, ambiguity, the ability to pick winners and losers and hide behind rules without them actually being there. They're the unwritten rules in between all of the spaces. And then they grant themselves power to waive all the rules or any rules that they want to for the people that they want to waive them for. But it doesn't guarantee that anybody gets the same treatment, or should I say everyone gets fair and equitable treatment in that process. So MLS could come in and say, hey, look, we're going to play Nicky Stadium. And we're blah, 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 blah. Same identical situation. We'd like to say it's 70 by 110, but we're really at like 65 by 105. And they're like, sorry, no waiver. Find a better stadium. Come back to us. That is literally the power the board has granted themselves and this task force, with giving themselves carte blanche to pick winners and losers. It's written right in Part I under the general. The very first part here, the general requirements for all professional leagues. The federation has granted to themselves a waiver procedures, and it says waiver request will only be granted for good cause shown by the U.S. Soccer Board of Directors. So the Board of Directors is giving themselves waiver authority arbitrarily to use arbitrarily. The last part of the general requirements talk about amendments, saying that any league shall have 3 years from the date it receives any amendment to these standards to come into compliance with any amendments to these standards. So for anyone, let's say, for example, that the professional league standards, that the board got together, made some changes and said, we are implementing solidarity payments, training compensation, promotion relegation. We're doing all this tomorrow. That would be awesome. that the Federation actually took his job seriously for once to do its primary duty, its primary fiduciary duty, which requirements any existing league will have 3 years to get into compliance. So if the rule was in place and MLS hated it, they would get 3 years from the date they received the amendment to get in compliance with all of those rules. It's never going to happen tomorrow. So anyone who goes on social media and gives that excuse, like, you're just trying to destroy everything because you want it to happen tomorrow. You want to blow everything up tomorrow. They're building something and you're not going to let it happen. You want to destroy, you want to try to mess everything up and make them do stuff that they're not ready to do. Well, guess what? Guess what? They have 3 years minimum from the time that the policies are implemented. They have 3 years to be in compliance with that. So you're talking about the time it would take to go through the rules, update the rules, enforce and make leagues operate by those standards, none of which is even in the Illinois alterations have been made in this proposal to the National Council at the AGM to be up for consideration. None of those aspects have even been put in place. And equitable for everyone involved in the professional council. That's all it is. It's not even going in to any of those other things. So even if you were to go on social media and be like, all these guys that want, promotion relegation, or they want solidarity payments and training compensation, they're trying to damage MLS. They're trying to destroy MLS. They're trying to tear it all down. They're trying to do it tomorrow. It can't happen tomorrow. It's got to be time. There's got to have time. They're going to have time. I mean, it's probably, even if at this AGM, that there was a move to say, hey, we are going to begin the process of becoming FIFA compliant with our professional leagues. That process is going to go through discussions, and they're going to have to, sort through the professional league standards yet again and go through and figure out what is in compliance, what is out of compliance, what has to be changed, what has to be altered, what has to be improved, what has to get more detail. Then it's going to have to get approved. Then it's going to have to go before the National Council and get approved. So at the earliest that could even happen is the AGM in 2021. That have issue is they're not consistent. So Division I men's, for example, I'm going to give you a couple examples. The Division I men's says that at least 75% of the league's teams must play in metropolitan markets of at least 1 million persons. They don't define the size of a metropolitan market. Whose definition is that? What if I say that my metro market is twice the geographical size that you think it is? And by using that, I can make the claim that I meet that standard. What if yours is a smaller region and that means I don't make that standard? There's no definition. When you get into a women's Division I league and you look at markets and stadia and fields for a women's league, as it's written, it says at least 75% of the league's teams must play in metropolitan markets of at least 750,000 persons. Inconsistencies. So what has been done is, instead of having these rules all over the place and having some of these issues even something that the board of directors who claim that, this hasn't gone through all of our lawyer process and our ability to doctor this thing so we can pick winners and losers. That's what they're really saying. But they're like, well, this hasn't gone through our process is the way that we've done. Some definition, some detail, some depth that is not there. in the current rules. So it goes and says, look, metropolitan markets are defined as the population living within 75 miles of a team's home stadium. Wow. What a simple, clear definition. We can figure that out now. What's a metropolitan market? Stick a pin in the map where that's my home stadium. Go out 75 miles, draw a circle. If I got 750,000 people within that circle, I'm good. If I don't, and my league doesn't have at least the majority of the teams in that setup, then we're going to have some issues. And we're either going to need a waiver, and we're back to that arbitrary process, or we got to figure out something else in our structure of our league. So in all of these provisions, another example I'll point out, last point here, of the standardization jump through for competition for Major League Soccer, and no other league receives, no other competitive division receives this kind of unstandardized rules. They have made it more difficult to compete against them. They're already in. They didn't get in operating under these rules. They got in. They had an MLS employee running the federation. They changed the rules to make it harder to compete with them, and then everybody else has got another set of rules. And that's what's being standardized here. And one big issue that has been omitted in the financial viability piece is the specific ownership structure of the way the federation looks at how a team is owned, who owns it, how much do they own, and how much are they worth. This is an issue we've talked about before, where you create these financial hurdles where a team has to have an owner in Division I men's, where the principal owner has to own at least 35% of the club. They have to be worth $40 million. That $40 million net worth cannot include their personal residence or their ownership stake in the club. And the total ownership group has to be worth at least $70 million to operate a team in Division I. So, on a different field than where you made your money. Secondly, there is nothing, that is one of the worst ways to ensure financial viability and stability of a club. They have a performance bond, and as it's laid out here, demonstrate the financial capacity to operate for 3 years, regardless of your ownership structure. You got to prove that you could run a club, that you could pay your bills for 3 years. That might be in your business plan. It might be in your ownership structure. It might be in having, one principal owner that's got a ton of money and he's willing to put that money on the line to prove financial viability. It may be cash on hand. It may be your capacity, your ability to prove your capacity to borrow money from a bank, a line of credit, etc., if you need it. There are so many ways to prove financial viability that goes beyond this arbitrary ownership model that is, quite frankly, one of the worst ways to secure that clubs are viable. And the federation in all of this already has the ability to force teams to prove this. So there's no worry that a team, if it was structured differently, if it was a community-owned club or a Bundesliga-style 50% plus one club, that they would not be forced to prove it. That the federation has in these rules their ability to do this. These standards, this entire amendment proposal by Illinois Adult Soccer standardizes these rules. It is not a radical, promotion relegation, solidarity payments, deal. This is just simply going through and cleaning up language so that every division and every setup has the same type of process they go through. But it is absurd that thorough details and standardized processes are frowned upon. It is just absurd. And we're going to get into this right after the break. I'm going to wrap all this up in a way for you to really understand what is going on here and what really needs to happen and why it matters so much right after the break. And speaking of what matters, charity water matters. It matters to people all over the world that need clean drinking water. They provide clean drinking water, and you can learn more about them at charitywater.org. We'll be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
The process in which they have been written and why that matters. And, to kind of wrap all this up, and we have not gotten into all of the details of the proposal by Illinois Adult, but I gave a few examples here of the standardization process and things that needed to get more defined or cleaned up, etc. When you look at the professional league standards as a process, what you have in place now is a process of a board that has gone rogue. They have operated without permission from the bylaws or policies to explicitly write and create professional league standards. Every other provision, policy that goes before the general council for a vote, and in that policy or bylaw could affect youth soccer, it could affect adult amateur soccer, it could affect athletes, etc. They all get to vote on it. And the U.S. Soccer Board of Directors created a process, an internal process for their board that basically only allows the professional leagues to basically provide some input and feedback on proposals, but not have any say in voting, and nor does any other council get a say in voting. For example, the youth or adult or athlete council don't get a say in voting. The rules as they're written do not go before the general council at an annual general meeting to get approved. And it is one of the reasons why the policy, the professional league standards are not published. You can find them, but they are not published in the bylaws of the this Illinois adult policy into place. I have talked to sources who have received feedback from members of the Federation front office who have even tried to downplay the need for the bylaw amendment that is attached to this policy proposal to try to say that you don't need to include the bylaw amendment. It's just a definition. It doesn't matter. And that bylaw is a simple definition that just says the professional league standards are the rules that govern the professional leagues as determined by the board of directors. And it was altered. This bylaw amendment was altered to say that the professional league standards are the rules that govern professional leagues as approved by the general council, the general membership of U.S. Soccer, its members. And those were all efforts behind the scenes to keep this from coming up to a vote, to keep this effort from coming to light. It was a sabotage effort to try to prevent this entire policy bylaw amendment from ever seeing the light of day. And the reason this policy, I call it an amendment, it's not an amendment. The actual policies itself, there's some house cleaning that are cleaned up from the board written version, but the actual policy is a new policy. It doesn't exist in the policy manual. And the reason why it doesn't exist in the policy manual, where it should be vote or approval of these rules. And the sad part is that the professional leagues, the pro council, the athlete council, the youth council, adult amateur council, all who would be affected or influenced by these rules don't even get to vote on them. And that should change. The federation should not have its board be able to go rogue and do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, however it wants, for whoever it wants. It should be operating in good faith in a standardized way, not picking winners and losers, but growing the game in all areas for all people. And that includes having rules that are consistent and having procedures that are consistent. And that is what needs to happen in this situation. Bylaw 109 and that definition needs to be approved at the upcoming AGM in Nashville. And this policy needs to go up for a vote and be approved to be included and inserted into the policy manual. It is federation business, federation rules, and a board gone rogue doing whatever they want to protect the special interest of one league over everyone else should not be allowed to stand anymore. My hope is that the members around the country who show up at Nashville show up and are prepared to take this on and take their federation back. Because this is a situation where the professional council, the pro leagues, the adult amateur, the youth, and the athlete councils, and all of the other voters at large have an opportunity to do the right thing. And I hope you do the right thing in Nashville at the AGM, because this process needs to be going through the same process that any other bylaw and policy goes through, and that is the approval of compliance with the spirit of the bylaws and policies of the organization. Thanks for watching the show. As always, you can watch on Facebook.com/WRKMN, on YouTube, on Twitter, as well at DanielWorkman.com. Check me out on Twitter or Instagram at Daniel Workman. Thanks for watching the show today. We'll see everyone again tomorrow.